What you are about to hear or see is a conversation between myself and a anthroposophist called Christoph Hueck, who lives in southern Germany. This is a particularly rewarding conversation that himself and I had, and is particularly dear to this project that Jeff and Alexandra and I are working on in making the philosophical or the philosophy side of Rudolf Steiner more accessible. He's going to be describing for us really something of, for me, enormous significance. This idea of the of seven key philosophical works of Steiner as a confirmation of the importance of understanding what thinking is, entering into a living thinking relationship with anthroposophy, and I think he does a wonderful job of bringing that to life in the conversation that you're about to hear. Very keen to hear your own thoughts and comments about Christoph and how valuable you find his work. He is open to doing more such conversations, and for me to be able to do so with such a knowledgeable person with so much experience, I think is something that an English audience should be allowed to have. So let me know your thoughts there on that. Enjoy our conversation. Hi, Christoph. Extremely nice to see you and have you here online. How are you today?
Well, thanks very much for inviting me for this interesting talk and format. And I'm very well. I'm doing very well. We have a rainy day in Tübingen, so I'm sitting inside. Glad that I have a warm room and that it doesn't rain inside my apartment. And I'm doing fine. Thanks.
It's so nice even hearing the name Tübingen. So it reminds me of the time that I spent in the south of Germany.
Yeah.
And in actual fact, it was one of the reasons that I initially came across your name. Serendipity led me to have a look what the Anthroposophical Society in Stuttgart was doing. And that's really how I got to know you. And wonderful lecture that you gave there about 2 years ago about this reverse of the direction of will that's talked about in GA20, and really struck me that how deeply you were penetrating into Steiner's work, and I felt after reading more information about you that it would be wonderful an English audience. So share some of the insights that you about Steiner. We're not going to particularly talk about GA20. So we've got another topic which we'll come to in a second. But so we've got to know each other a little bit. But I'd love it if you present, give a little overview, so like anthroposophical overview, who you are, what you're doing in Germany, and how you work with anthropology.
You know, the older I get, the less I know who I am. So, well, I live in Tübingen, close to the cloister in Tübingen, where the young Schelling grew up, and Hegel and Hölderlin went to the Stift school here, and I work in Stuttgart in the Rudolf Steiner House. I'm a natural scientist by training, studied biology and chemistry, and I've been working for about 10 years in molecular biology, gene technology, and vaccine development, all this.
Oh,
I
controversial
really
subject.
got into it. And before that, when I was 21, I came to know anthroposophy during my social work here in Germany in a anthroposophical village with handicapped adults. And this was so revealing for me. And it saved my life, basically, I think.
Mhm.
I would not know what I would have done with my life if I wouldn't have come across anthroposophy. And from then on, I really studied it and started very early to study also the written texts of Rudolf Steiner. And I always wanted to really understand. And then I wanted to see how can I build the bridge between anthroposophy and natural sciences, and especially genetics, question of life, question of the organism. And nowadays, I'm in between, I was a Waldorf teacher for almost 6 years,
In
and then
Stuttgart.
7 years at the Freie Hochschule in Stuttgart teaching Waldorf teachers. And I became a professor there for life sciences. And right now, meanwhile, I'm working in also giving seminars, many seminars for a lot of educators and young people, but also have a strong personal interest in natural philosophy. And I find it very interesting that philosophers who are not anthroposophists start to get interested in Goethean science, and because they feel or see that genetics and Darwinism does not explain life and does not explain the organism. So we are in front of the same wall again. How can we understand life? And Goethe, and especially Steiner's interpretation of Goethe, really solves this question. And I figured out for myself once again, and even clearer than before, how Steiner answers this question, how Goethe provides a scientific approach to understanding life in its holistic features. And it's really great because I rediscover Steiner again right now in his very early writings in the introductions to Goethe's naturwissenschaftliche natural science writings.
Mhm.
And I've in 2016 I founded, together with Andreas Neider, who is a very good friend and colleague of mine, we founded the Acanthus Academy in Stuttgart. And we do a lot of seminars and meditation courses. I'm also teaching anthroposophical meditation because this is a direct extension of Goetheanism and of studying Steiner. And we do a lot of conferences. We will have an exhibition on Goethean science starting in April until July. Maybe this can be a little advertisement for it.
Absolutely.
In the
Definitely.
Steiner House in Stuttgart.
Mhm.
And I write books and so on. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
when you come
I'm
to
married and I have 4 children, and they all went through Waldorf schools and they're all great people. So, yeah, I guess that's enough about myself.
some wonderful to have you here. We've got us like a rough plan of what it is we want to, what we'd like to talk to, the topics we'd like to talk today. Um, and I'm actually going to read the passage from Wealth Lecture by Steiner,
Mhm, mhm,
which was actually the time which it was on reading this for the, if it was the fifth or perhaps even more time, they really began to wake up philosophical path
mhm,
that you were referring to. I mean, I came into contact with philosophy of freedom years ago,
mhm,
and had read it on and off many times, but something very special happened between 3 4 years ago,
mhm,
And it was actually this particular passage, and it's intimate links to their whole. So
Mhm.
I'll just I'll read that out so that people have a context, and I'll also link it. So it starts the 12th lecture. Yesterday we reached the point of discussing the change which takes place in the human astral meditation, concentration, other practices which are given in the various methods of creation. We have seen that the astral body is thereby affected in such a way that it develops within itself the organ which it needs for perceiving in the higher world. And we have said, up to this point, the principle everywhere is the same, although the this practice can effective culture. The principal difference is the occurrence of the next thing which must follow so that the pupil is able to actually perceive in the higher worlds. It is necessary that the organs which have been out of the astral part impress, stamp themselves upon the body, be impressed. This refashioning of the astral body directly through meditation is called by a name catharsis, purification. Catharsis, purification, as its purpose as the discarding on the astral hinders it harmonious and regular, thus enabled by a higher. It is endowed with the germ of these higher organs. It is only necessary to bring forces which are. We have said that varied methods can be employed without this. Indeed, a person can go very far in this matter if, for example, he has gone thoroughly and inwardly experienced that in my book, Philosophy of Spiritual Activity, Freedom, and feels that this book was for him stimulation, and that now he has reached where he can himself actually use them just as they. If this person holds the same relationship with this book as a virtuoso playing a selection on the piano holds, that is, he reproduces the whole thing himself naturally, to his ability to do so. And through the strictly built up sequence, this book, which is Catharsis, be developed by a degree. So, what I'm going to invite you to talk about second is you've actually, in my mind, you've gone, you've taken this encouragement from Steiner a step further and are really pointing to the value of 7 specific books of Steiner initiating this or starting this process, catharsis, purification. Just before you like launch into people who watch the channel, Jeff and I, we started with the philosophy of freedom through to truth and science, and we're currently doing GA2 in our group, and this is one of the appreciation I've grown. It's like you trod the path. I didn't know you trod the path. I started to tread it, and then I recognize you are doing the same thing, or you did a long time ago, and you've expanded it. How much my understanding it deepened by engaging thoroughly.
Hmm.
So take us through this paper, article, booklet. I'm not sure what you call
Well, it's a booklet. Yeah, it's a booklet.
it. What is it you're trying to tell us in that booklet?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, this is not a short story. It's a small booklet, but it's not a short story. But you can interrupt me, or we can talk about it. I mean,
do you want to start with GA1 and so like?
Well, yeah, I discovered pretty early when I studied anthroposophy and talked to other people about it who were also studying it, that there's people who are really into GA3, truth and science, yeah, and they swear on it, and it's the thing totally, and they do not talk about the philosophy of freedom. And other people, actually a much bigger group, is just focused on the philosophy of freedom, and this is everything, and you need to have this, and without the philosophy of freedom you can't understand anthroposophy at all, and so on. And when I read these books, I first was it was a lot more easy for me to read philosophy of freedom than to understand truth and science, GA3. But being a biologist, I also studied GA2. What's the English translation? The foundation
outlines of a
epistemology or so of Goethe's worldview. The outlines. And I found the same ideas described or discussed in the philosophy of freedom, but in a very different way. Very different. And was surprised that these texts were written by the same author. I mean, of course, you can understand the Steiner style, but then they're very different, especially when you dive a little bit into them, when you start to, as I like to call it, when you start to taste them, to taste the different style or so. And then studying the introductions, GA1, is again very different. And then I came to know the work of Frank Teichmann in Stuttgart, and also the work of Florine Laundries, and especially these people and others, and of Herbert Witzmann. And Herbert Witzmann wrote a very interesting book about the philosophy of freedom as the foundation of artistic work. And they all discuss this, what you just cited from Steiner, that the whole book is composed. And well,
could you perhaps give an example?
Yeah.
So when you say composition,
I mean,
what do you mean?
For example, I mean, now the question is, what is the composing principle? Yeah, because you need to have that first, before you can discover a composition. And of course, then there's, and this is also a Goethean thing, that there's two aspects of a composition. The one aspect is that a composition has a theme. Yeah, and the theme in all these books is the same. The theme is always the relation of the human spirit to the world, in cognition and in action. It's always the same theme through all these philosophical writings of Rudolf Steiner. How are we related to the world when we recognize the world or when we act in the world? And but this does not explain the differences. And Goethe described that when he said because all this is Goethean, yeah, Goethe discovered all of this, and Steiner elaborated on it. But the idea from Goethe was he studied the plants and he came to this sort of intuitive imagination, however you will understand it. All is leaf.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to explain it in a more understandable way, then we could say the plant is the surface. All is surface. Yeah, then it's a little bit easier for us to understand nowadays. Yeah, and this, but this is not enough. It's just the principle. But you need to have, in addition to the principle, you need to have the Goethe called it the model, and he said, I also need a key to the model. And the key is the principle of change, of metamorphosis. And in the plant, it's expansion and contraction, threefold. And so when I studied anthroposophy, and I came to also, I was very lucky that I had the chance in Stuttgart to teach Waldorf pedagogy. What's the English title of the teacher course? Allgemeine Menschenkunde, GA
Foundational
293.
Theory of Man, perhaps.
Yeah, Study of Man. I think it's called Study of Man in one English translation.
Yes, I recognize that title, yeah.
And then you get this idea about the human being, threefoldness and sevenfoldness and so on, and four members of the being. And with time, I realized that these are not only describing, for example, the four members, they do not only describe four aspects of our being, but also four ways of looking at the world.
Mm-hmm.
And once that is discovered, then you can use it as a tool. And then you have this key to the principle. The principle is the relation between the human mind and the world. And the key to it, to use it, is this metamorphosis through this four or sevenfold principle, which changes in itself, but is always a metamorphosis of the same. And for example, one thing where it's very clear is in theosophy. In the philosophy of freedom, I would need to take a little bit a different key to explain the whole book. But in the theosophy, we have four main chapters. Mm-hmm. The first chapter is about the human being. This is like description of the whole. It's like you look at it. The second chapter is about reincarnation. So about development, about reincarnation and karma. So we, from a sort of spatial view, imaginative view, we go into a time process. We go into development. The third chapter is about the life of the soul after death. And it's completely, you turn your view completely inside. Yeah, you look at yourself, at your intentions, your feelings, and and this whole world after death is an inside world, an astral world. And then the fourth chapter is a path of knowledge. So that's about doing something. And these four principles, they just describe they are related or are the same as the four members of the human being. What is it? How do we do it? Or how is it? Yeah. Why is it? So you look inside, you approach the logic, the internal logic of it, and who does it? Who is it? What? Why, how, why, and who. And this is the same as physical body, etheric body, astral body, and the I in terms of epistemological looking. And then, once I found that, I saw, GA1 is, what is it all about? GA2, Grundlinien, foundation, is how do we do it? Mm-hmm. GA3, Truth in Science, is why is it so? It's a crystal clear logic. And GA4 is who does it? I'm free.
Yeah.
And then I discovered that the next three books of Steiner, which always were a question to me, why did he write a book about Nietzsche?
Mhm.
Why did he write another book about Goethe? Yeah, Goethe's worldview.
Yes, too. Yeah.
And they started to completely fall into that scheme, into that figure, into that picture. Yeah.
A question about this compositional nature. You mentioned, I'm familiar with the name Florian Lowndes. I didn't know Teichmann. I don't know to what extent his work has been translated in English. I know I looked briefly online and wasn't actually able to find anything. But is he essentially does he have the same ideas um, as Florian Lowndes
Yeah.
and Witzmann? One of the reasons I ask is I do remember reading Witzmann about the original preface, which is something that I've looked at in a quite a detailed fashion in exactly the way you're describing there. And I was very surprised to see Witzmann actually just simply using a polarities rather than moving through the forms through the four forms or the sevenfold forms that you're referring to there. Is there anything you can say to either Eichmann, because Lowndes is easily available in English. That's not a problem. Eichmann and
I'm
Witzmann.
not sure whether Frank Teichmann has been translated. Actually, maybe we should do that. Yeah. It's a very good book. Resurrection in Thinking, the Christ Impulse in the Philosophy of Freedom. And he describes the 7 steps in various different ways.
Mm-hmm.
And he points out something that is very important, several aspects that are very important. One aspect is when you do this, when you look at Steiner's texts and you search for their composition, you do not look at them in a discursive, let's say a discursive way, one after the other,
Yeah.
but you look at them from a above perspective, like on a map. You see what is usually in time. When you think through it, you see in space in front of you, before you. Yeah, you see the structure, or you search for the structure. And this is the same view that we acquire, that we get when we have after death. When we look at everything we experience in life in this huge tableau.
Yeah.
So it's a view from the etheric world. So this is a way to really train thinking to become acquainted and sensitive to etheric experiences when you study the structure of Steiner's text. And the other aspect is you get to understand development, because development is just the same. You have a principle and you have the change in time. And this is, you really you lift your thinking into the etheric sphere. And I also like to call this the etheric body of anthroposophy. The physical body is the text, yeah, dead. And the etheric body of anthroposophy is the relation between the structure of the text, the wisdomful composition, and so on, where everything starts to communicate with each other. And as you read before, yeah, every part has its specific position and you cannot change them and so on. And from that emerges the astral understanding of you dive into, or you it's like I experience sometimes like walking into a into something, you walk into the astral room of the meaning of all of this. Yeah, you do you under
Go on, help our listeners to understand what it is you're experiencing.
Well, I mean, the first thing is you have the text, yeah,
Yeah.
side by side, no question. This physical. Then I was talking about the etheric structure, the living structure, where how the parts communicate with each
And
other, how
develop
they are,
one into the other.
yes, one, how they metamorphose, how they mirror each other, and
Yeah.
so on. Yeah, we can talk about that in a little more detail later. And then you start to understand the whole idea even more. And understanding is something. Yeah, well, the light goes on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And once
And
the
then
light's gone on, sorry.
the final, excuse me, just to complete it, the final aspect of this is that you get at least a slight. Maybe this is not true, but I sometimes feel I get an impression of the intention of Rudolf Steiner. You even you access the author's intention before he wrote it, you know? So the study of the text also has its four different steps. And this is very interesting. You know, I read my book again before, before this interview, and I forgot that I wrote about the medieval practice of um, Lectio Divina. In the medieval monks had a practice how to study the Bible,
Mhm.
and this is a fourfold method which describes just the same steps. It's a studying of the text, it's a repetition of the text, it's a meditation of the text, and the fourth level they call contemplation. It's like the unified experience, being one with God for a short moment or so, or with it spiritual.
That's really interesting. I dug quite deeply into Dante last year.
Mm-hmm.
And in Dante, we find it's like the four levels of understanding
Yeah.
of analogy there. And I
Mm.
didn't realize it was like already firmly rooted or where
Yes.
its impulse started. So you're indicating in the medieval period.
No, it's even
And
older. It's there is this fourfold Schriftsinn, fourfold sense of the writings,
Mhm.
and this goes back to Origenes. This goes back to the Cairo, Alexandria school of
Mhm.
Neoplatonism, Origenes,
Okay.
and Teichmann also related to that. And this is because and this is also the same method, four steps of understanding.
And it's also there in the Zohar as well. I recently
Yeah,
discovered.
probably. I mean, it's really Steiner picked up all these reinvented,
Or
rebirth,
rediscovered, so like made them
re,
accessible to a modern mind.
rebirth them. Yeah.
Excuse me. I'd like to come back to a couple of points you made, just a couple of observations from the outside. This, you talked about the light going on. Um, some It is so interesting, isn't it, how we can read a text it's like multiple times and we think we've understood it, and then suddenly something really does happen and we understand it in a completely different light, and we have to ask ourselves, well, why was I incapable of seeing that before? And it really is exactly as you describe it. It's that experience of something was given to me. I am now able to look at it in a completely different light, like in
Mhm.
an enhanced light, because I've still got all the other ways that I now I'm understanding at a higher level, greater clarity.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that you were saying also resonated. very strongly. This idea of intentionality. My own experience is somewhat different, and I expect that's for me to wake up to, because I'm slightly younger in this journey. But one of the when I'm battling Steiner text with the physical body of his book, I I put myself in his mind. He's written this with intention. There's a very specific intention going on there, and that sort of like is part of will eventually carry me through to being able to see it. But actually, the way you described it was interesting, because your words was, if my memory serves me correctly, was like you can actually sense the intentionality, whereas I'm like more consciously, he's like realizing he must have had an intention to express himself in this way. Do you hear a difference in how I'm describing it to how you
Yeah,
describe
yeah. Yeah, I see. I'm not sure whether I'm touching Rudolf Steiner's intentions, but um, I compare it to when you are you yourself, when I myself am creative and producing a text or thinking something, I start with an intuition. Yeah. And this is before I have the words for it. I know what I want to write. And then I put it in words and I structure it. And putting it in words, I need to always follow it. Is it correct? And so on. So this is sort of a feeling. This is astral. The first is spiritual. This is astral. Feeling is it correct? Is it clear? And then I set it into a form, a living form. I bring it on paper, and finally it's produced. And this is the 4 steps again. And when I read Steiner's text in the way I described, I have the impression I go this back up this ladder, yeah.
it?
And I mean, we are in a great lucky position that Steiner talked so much about his intentions and that he expressed that he had to. I mean, he had to bring the spiritual. He had to bring reincarnation. You could also say, and that's what he also described. He had to find a way from the human mind, from the spirit in the human being to the spirit in the world, in the cosmos. That's the first leading thought. Anthroposophy is a way to find this, a method to find this connection. And and then he said, I had to, in the 19th century, I had to bring this in the Gewand, in the coat, or how, I don't know English
Yeah, the
translation,
coat or the cape or the cloak.
in the cape of German idealism.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same, yeah. The general idea is, how do we find the spirit in the world and connect it to the spirit in us?
Does he
And
mention?
and then
Sorry.
of course, I mean, then you find what when I described these different texts, they were all about the same theme. You get to get an idea about the theme of these texts, and then you read this in Steiner, yeah, and then you're confirmed.
Thought wandering a little bit as you're describing that. I've been. I'm sure you know the name Tomberg. I've been also delving into
Which name?
Valentin Tomberg.
Oh, I don't know a lot about Tom Berg.
It doesn't matter. You don't need to know
Okay.
because it's very interesting. My perspective, because he to describe that same process that you're describing there, he talks about it in terms of vertical breathing
Mhm.
as opposed to horizontal
Hmm.
breathing. And I
Yeah,
was
that's
just
nice.
wondering to what extent intuitively he's saying the same thing as you're describing there.
Mhm.
But has it, to your knowledge, it hasn't to my knowledge, been expressed in this terms of vertical breathing?
I don't know.
No, no, it was it's an
No,
interesting.
no. I mean, there's this Steiner's, of course, famous expression of the inverted cultus,
Mm-hmm.
uh,
Of the
inverted cult.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
cult.
der umgekehrte Kultus.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what the correct English term.
Reversed cult,
Yeah, maybe.
reversed
Which is
religion.
comparable to that a little bit. Um, but no, I don't know. But of course, breathing is a very good image because these levels of understanding, they are always there, and you move through them when you
Mm.
understand something. And Steiner is one interesting thing about Steiner is that he just describes what we all do, but he describes it in a very in a way that we have to slow down. So we do these steps, slowing down, and we can start to observe them. And then, for example, when we start to observe how thinking moves through these texts, we get a feeling for the etheric forces. We have that. It's all in us. And we know why plants live and animals, but we cannot observe it because it's too crumbled and too quick and so on. And studying Steiner just slows the whole thing down and makes it uh, conscious and makes it so that you can practice it, so that you can go through this catharsis that you were talking about in the beginning.
So how does memory processing link into this process of both slowing down and the living into the etheric?
Uh, Sorry, I didn't understand the question.
Okay, yeah, sure. So perhaps if I'll give a little bit of background and then
Mhm,
explain, and it might give a
mhm,
context for the question. So,
mhm,
one, as I've been working with the methods we talked about that Flow and Lowndes, this
mhm.
one of the key ideas in there is you're slowing down because what you are doing is you are consciously describe this process. So I read in the German and then I summarize each single sentence into English as I'm reading
Mhm,
it. And if
mhm,
I haven't understood it, then I have to understand it to be able to move on.
mhm,
So there's a lot of slowing down that goes on
mhm,
that process. And then I
mhm,
further condense it once more. So once let's say I've got 19 paragraphs,
mhm.
then that becomes, so that's 19 sentences,
Sure.
like in a final condensation. So that's a part of the slowing down process. But then another part, which seems integral. I don't know whether this is mind reading or integral to the Lowndes method. Is this idea of actually like work, like living through the form in your memory, not sort of like not looking at your notes on the paper, so that it
Yes, I
really starts to
understand.
live in you. So it was in that spirit that I meant to what extent is sort of the memory process in
Yeah.
your own
Sure.
from your own perspective related to the process.
Yeah, I mean, I never tried to consciously train to remember, for example, the sequence of paragraphs in chapter 3 of the Philosophy of Freedom, for example. Yeah, you can also do that, of course, but I don't know. I mean, from once one achieves this overview over the structure of a text, then it's very easy to remember.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah, because that was one of the things I noticed in my own practice is that the bits that I struggled with to remember, I was using what I would call a mechanical or a technical
Mm,
technique
mhm,
to
mhm,
get the memory to produce something, but it hadn't really grasped what was
mm,
going on there.
mhm.
Or if either it hadn't grasped it fully, or another clear idea that developed out of those experiences. That what I wasn't seeing was like what was you talked about intuition earlier, so like the life behind the words that was moving it from one sentence to the other. So this
Mm-hmm.
metamorphosis process, there's a natural process going on there. And once you begin to connect with that is the being, that it's like in that thought there, that memory process, it isn't a um it's not a battle any longer. It's a smooth moving through the curve where you can select, you can do it really quickly or you can slow it
Sure,
down,
sure. Yeah,
bathe in that particular idea that's being developed
yeah,
there.
yeah, yeah, yeah. As I said, I think it's very much comparable to this experience of the life tableau after death. What was described by Steiner and is now described by thousands and thousands of near-death experienced people. And then you see all the details, and I mean it's a big feast to read the text in this way, because you discover new details from this bird's eye perspective, yeah, and you see how, and then even I mean Florian Landres also showed, and Teichmann also, how not only the chapters but then the paragraphs and the sentences are all structured in the same way. Can be a little exhausting,
Yeah, a little daunting.
but it's great to discover it by your own. It's a real discovery, and for me, it was a great discovery when I thought I can understand these seven writings of Steiner in this way, because they suddenly were not then of course you do not see them as just he wrote something because he was just up to it or so, yeah, or by chance, or because he wanted to become the editor of Nietzsche's works, so he wrote a book about Nietzsche and so on. Yeah, no, it has an internal organic principle in it.
So let's dig a little bit deeper into this, the whole catharsis through those seven works. So
Mhm.
your
You know what? Excuse me for interrupting. I just opened a figure. Is it possible that I share my screen with you for a second?
uh, you
Because
can, but they won't see it. I can share the image
oh,
afterwards.
okay. So I will send you this image.
Mhm.
It's a depiction, or very close to what we call the Cassini curve.
Mm-hmm.
And you can describe the Cassini curve in, imagine it describes the relation of the subject of cognition to the object. And in the physical world, we have the subject and the object separated from each other. Yeah, two separated spheres,
Mm-hmm.
and we stand opposed to it. We look at it. This is the basic. What is it? And then we have this lemniscatic
Mm-hmm.
relation, where we create something and observe it again, and we find the links between the parts of it. Yeah, because by moving back and forth, by remembering what we saw and finding the new, and so on. And then we start to understand it. Then we are not separated from what we understand anymore, but we still know we are the one that understand. Yeah, and we start to feel it. The light goes on.
The wholeness is
And
there.
finally, we're intuitively in it.
Mm.
So this curve is a very nice and very helpful geometric figure to demonstrate these relations. And then you can think that you move up and down. Breathe through these. So I will send that to you. Yeah.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about
Mhm.
there. And for those people that have looked at astronomy, by
Mhm.
Steiner, they'll be very familiar with
Mhm.
the level of attention brings to the Cassini curves, but they are a wonderful expressing idea. It's like you've got this one mathematical equation, this
Right. It's the same
singularity,
principle.
but how does it express itself?
Right. You have to have the model and the key to it. Yes.
Yeah, thank you for adding that. So yeah, back to the catharsis. So let's start with GA1 there. So how's he initiating this cathartic process? What's he giving us?
Well, um, yeah, I mean, the bird's eye view is he's giving a tremendous overview over Goethe's works. Actually, it's important to note that this was not composed as a book in itself, but it's four different parts of four. There are four introductions to the four volumes of Goethe's scientific writings, and they appeared from 1884 to 1897. So they were later fused into one book. So it's not really correct to consider it as a whole book of Steiner, but it's from the whole style and so on, and the subject, of course, it belongs together. We are led through all of the physical realm, the plants, the animals, the human being, evolution, space, time, logic, mathematics, geology, meteorology, art, freedom. All the questions are touched. Matter, yeah, material, light. It's all being touched. And basically, it's like you stand there and look around. What is there? And the all is being discussed under the light of the idea, like the sun shining from above. Everything, every aspect is discussed in the light of the idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this is the bird's eye view on the whole thing. Of course, there could be said a lot about it. And another thing I would like to stress is, imagine Rudolf Steiner was 23 years old, and this was the first thing he published. And if you read the first few paragraphs of the first introduction, there's this paragraph. He says, the important thing about Goethe's plant metamorphosis is not the idea that the leaves are the same than the petals, than the stamens, and the so on, but the wonderful gedanklich mental construction of the laws which influence each other and work through each other. This is one thing. And then the most important methodological thing is that he said, we have to think this actively through. If we bring this to life in our mind, we will experience the idea that is active in the plant. And when you remember what I said before, that the task was to connect the spiritual in the human being to the spiritual in the world, then this is the method how to do it. You have to recreate the principles of the world mentally, and then you experience inside yourself the same forces and the same laws that work in the outside, in the world. And this is later on, for example, described in GA20 in the talk that you mentioned in the introduction. And this is the amazing thing, is that it's just right there from the start. With a young Steiner, he just, yeah, like, boom. And this short paragraph is the absolutely central methodological shortest way to how to describe it. What later becomes in the letters of St. Michael in the Leading Thoughts, which becomes this idea we descended on the ladder on the stairs of intellectuality, and we have to ascend again on the stairs of the will. And this is again this gorgeous, this amazing and thing that you once you have the idea, then you see it everywhere, and it's been metamorphosed in so many ways. And I was so I mean, I have no words for it, that this young man, he just wrote it down in the first few paragraphs, the whole thing. So this is very important, and this is also a principle of a living principle of an organism, and the whole work of Steiner, the whole works are an organism. The principle is that you find the big picture, you always find also in the smallest details. And this is organic.
Cosmos within a cosmos. There's some
Microcosm, macrocosm, or yes.
Another random question. I happen to be. Do you know the name Sigismund von Gleich? Yeah. He was describing this. Another, to my mind, different words for the same phenomena you're describing, and he describes modern science as like being seeing everything through the microscope of cause effect, whereas really what a phenomenalist, of which Goethe is the archetypal phenomenon, what you've got going on there is a fundamentally different relationship. It's being and appearance. And we as the human being are recognizing like the being that is making itself present in whether they are internal, out, external phenomena, but reality behind the phenomena, which I thought was
or within, behind, yeah. This is Aristotelian. This is not new.
No. but at the same time, it is new to us, isn't it? That's
yes. I mean, it's brought in a modern way, but it's completely Aristotle. But not the great thing is in Steiner that it's not abstract anymore like in Aristotle, but it's enlivened. It starts to enliven ourselves, and this is the future.
Yeah, that participation aspect that you were talking to earlier, we really experience those forces living within us. We are partaking.
Yes, and completely conscious and completely scientific. If you want to, you don't have to do the science, but you can be scientific. You can also have anthroposophy in different ways. That's what I wanted to say.
How would you, for somebody that doesn't recognize this participation that you're about, how could you find something in their own likely experience but actually give a hint of what participation is?
Yeah, I mean, a direct elaboration of what we've been talking about is how to obtain knowledge of higher worlds. And there's this practice of observing nature, observing a plant, observing an animal, and then just simply remembering it. And let it live in your memory for 5 minutes. We do that. I mean, I have groups we practice that almost every week, stuff like that. And just this small exercise opens worlds. Because when you observe a lily on the field or a bird, a blackbird here in the leaves, and you recreate it in memory, then you do exactly what I mentioned before. You recreate it, you bring it to life in your own mind, and immediately it starts to talk to you. there's worlds opening up of experience and of understanding. And then we do the same exercise again in the inner mode of reverence or devotion. And when you do that, I mean, it's always difficult to talk about experiences, yeah? Because people who do not have the experience, they just only have the words, the straw, but not the gold. But if you do that, and it's very easy to do, and almost, I mean, I have not met anybody who could not do that. You bring yourself in a mood of devotion, and then you observe the blackbird again on the tree. And you start to feel the astral in the bird, the connection with its surroundings, with the world. You start to feel the evolution behind it, the relation to other animals, it's worlds opening up. And people, they come to my courses. I'm always surprised that they keep coming. When they come, they talk a little bit. When they go out after 1.5 hours, they're completely inspired and happy and great and so on. Yeah, it's much better than going to the movies. And so we have all these capacities in ourselves, and this is really it's easy to access it, and maybe another thing I could say is last year we set up a sort of scientific project with 60 people who were meditating these things and meditating like a mantra from Steiner and doing one other exercise for 6 months. And they were doing it 2 times a day, 10 minutes in the morning, 10 minutes in the evening, and they were writing down diaries every day, what they did and what they experienced. And now we're in the process of publishing it together with the university in Witten, and the results are absolutely breathtaking. Because people not only wrote, my relation to nature is so much more intense. My sensitivity has grown so much. My personal relations are so much deeper. I sleep better. I can better concentrate. I wake up easy, more easy. I lost my fear of the future. The colleagues find me a lot nicer than before. I'm not kidding.
No.
Yeah. And this was through all of them. I mean, not all these individual things for everybody, but it was the resonance was amazingly positive to this. And just after 3 months practicing these things for 10 minutes a day.
I think they even did studies on meditation groups in the 70s or 80s in the effects. I don't know how rigorous these scientific studies were, because that's a complex area in itself. But what I'm hinting at is it's actually not surprising. What you're saying, it's only surprising if you haven't actually practiced it yourself.
Yeah, but the difference to what we usually understand, or what people usually understand on meditation, they either go into the MBSR direction, so mindfulness, or into this Buddhist inspired meditations for a long time, trying to reach some other states of mind. And the anthroposophical meditation is very different in 2 ways. One thing is it only takes 10 minutes a day, yeah, not hours.
Yep.
The other thing is, sorry, this is a little, but the other thing is it's oriented towards getting to know something and not oriented towards your own well-being. The well-being is just a side effect, a positive. But the thing is, you open up your ego, your mind to the world. And so you increase your connectedness. And with increasing connectedness and increasing inner strength and relation to the spirit, you increase your creativity and your self-confidence and your health. And it's, I was surprised because it's very, very practical. We sometimes tend to think anthroposophy is something, but it's really down to earth. The only thing is you just have to do it. And that's the difficult thing about it.
There's actually a strong resonance. I'm reading Italian, and I've had to read some Leopardi poems, and there's a poem called "The Infinite," and what is so interesting is I connect to Spinoza's on the improvement of the intellect, and right at the beginning in the prologue there, Spinoza talks about his own experience of the infinite, and about how it's like caused him to to live himself deeper into that, because that's where true life was. It sounds so abstract the way I'm describing it, but it's beautifully expressed in the
Mhm.
prologue there of
Mhm.
Spinoza. And I
Mhm.
also hear that same idea coming across. It's like when you live yourself into a blackbird, you're
Mhm.
not in yourself any longer. You're in another infinite space,
Yeah.
and you grow. There's it becomes a completely different breathing quality um, that we experience, because we are freeing ourselves from ourselves.
Yeah. And at the same time, in this anthroposophical exercises, you completely remain yourself.
Yeah, it's like
Yeah.
koan like. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you're awake, you think, you're just yourself, but your experience increases. Your capacity to experience and to understand increases dramatically.
Mm.
And
I could talk about that for a
this is
long time.
great. I mean, gives me a lot of hope for the future of anthroposophy. Yeah.
I agree. So I would love to carry on with that conversation, but we've got it's like our own little process we've got going. So that was a nice introduction to GA1 and how it enriches us.
Oh, yeah, we are
So
only at
moving,
GA1.
yeah. So GA2, we're moving into the
Yeah.
how or the etheric there
Yes.
in your own
GA2
thinking.
is just a method.
Hmm.
GA2 is from the very start, it's a method, and it's always built up in polarities.
Yes,
Goethe, Schiller, perception, thinking, um, Verstand, Vernunft. I don't know the English
intellect
word.
and reason. Yeah,
Right. Um, and so on.
inorganic, organic.
Inorganic, organic. And it always moves like a plant. Yeah? One, chip, chip, chip. And one thought develops out of the other in a completely organic way. And I mean, once you not see that, then you find it even in the wordings. Let me just maybe I won't be quick enough to pick that.
One of the things that I've noticed about with intellect and reason and for known is how this again these like seemingly dry abstract ideas become absolutely crucial. The feeling life completely is transformed when you then begin to see how that is impacting like our understanding of or the way in which it's influencing our understanding of the inorganic versus organic. There's this you experience this metamorphosis. You think the first time you come into contact with it, a philosophical concept. It's not that, but it's
Yeah,
so much more.
yes, it's much more. And for example, he describes Goethe's spirit, like an organism. He always turned out that side of his being that fits it to the respective request from the outside world, like an organism. Yeah? And later on, he describes that for the organism itself. There's a principle, an internal principle that's formed from external influences, conditions. And then he also describes this how the ideas, how the concepts are organically related to each other. The plant is related to the concept of the concept of the organism is related to the concept of life, the concept of life to evolution, and so on. Yeah, they are all internally related. And here also, this is all etheric. This is all, and it's all methodological how we can do it.
Yeah, that sense of microcosmic, macrocosmic really comes. Or my own experience of the book so far has been as like an intensification of that experience.
And then the one of the most important chapters is the one about the cognition of the organism in the book, about the typus, the type, and the fluid thinking, which is important to grasp the type, and so on. And Goethe's intellectual power of judgment, which is explained in this chapter. So that's all fits, yeah, to this. I mean, you cannot press it, the whole book, into this one idea, because as all the other things are also in it. But this is the main. Compared also to GA1, it's much more methodological, the book.
It allows you to begin to understand the scientific results that he achieved, or the discoveries achieved in one, and what was his actual method.
Yeah.
It's as easy as you were saying to be bowled over by all of these findings that he had, which were not according to the cause-effect method.
Mm-hmm.
And now we begin to understand why they are so.
Yes. Although this is already also explained in the introductions in GA1.
Oh,
yeah.
I didn't know.
But here it's more elaborated on, more expanded in GA2. And one other thing that is very important. This is actually something I was really. In GA2, Steiner says we cannot observe our thinking.
Mm-hmm. It says it in GA4 as well, doesn't he?
In GA4, he says first we cannot observe it, and then he says yes, we can observe it.
Okay, go on. Unpack what you wanted to say. Yeah.
And in GA2, he just says that our thinking helps us to look at the world, but we cannot. If there wouldn't be any world, we would see nothing.
Mm-hmm.
He describes how we bring forth the ideas and how they relate to each other, but it's like I'm productive, I'm full of life, but I still look at something. This is typical for the etheric. It still goes to the outside.
Mm-hmm.
And then in GA3, Truth and Science, the view turns. And then he describes what I see when I look at my thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And he still does not describe the thinker, but the thinking itself. And then in Philosophy of Freedom, it turns back to the thinker himself, to the activity of thinking. So even in do you understand what
Yes, I do. I was beginning to think, because Jeff and I, we've read it in the wrong order. Obviously, there's not a wrong order, but we've done 4, 3, 2.
The order doesn't matter. You can do it backwards and forth.
Yeah.
Goethe did it also back and forth.
But one of the things that, because one of the things that I've really appreciated with GA2, because I'm working, is so these sentences that get might be mentioned, one or two brief sentences about like a certain idea. For example, Steiner, it says in GA4, he says, ideas are just of the same nature as concepts. They're larger concepts, words to that effect.
Mm-hmm.
And he leaves that hanging there And if you don't know, if I hadn't read two,
That's true.
that's just an abstract idea
Yeah,
to me. I'm not negating it and I'm not endorsing it. I'm just saying that's what
yeah,
he says. But when I
yeah,
read GA2,
yes. That's true. In GA4, many things are just summarized.
yeah,
That's true. And he says that himself. He says, I didn't write this book for anybody else. I just wrote it I describe my own way.
and then when you said about it, I recognize that with GA3. So I'm digging around in my memory a little bit because it's a year or so since we looked at it. But again, when I was battling then with synthetic and analytical thinking, these type of concepts, again, so I've got that with me and the work that I did then, but it has presented itself in a completely new light. It feels like I've got the foundations, so like
Hmm?
for
Yeah, yeah,
GA3 because I've now read GA2.
yeah.
So I let's say perhaps abstractly I understood it, but now it's really gained a like firmer footings because
Yeah. They
is that in line with what you were trying to describe, or would you say I've started
yes, of
saying something?
course. I mean, they support each other and elaborate on each other. These books, and I mean, in GA2 in the foundations, we have the strong emphasis on the activity, on the productivity of thinking, but it's not subjective, but you produce something that it's in itself objective.
Yeah.
And this is another thing that is typical for the etheric, that it's productive. And in GA3, in Truth and Science, Steiner describes this, we just have to produce something and then we have to wait whether it fits. It's the opposite gesture. You have to take yourself back and listen whether the thoughts and the concepts fit to each other. And if they don't fit, you were not right. So this gesture, productivity and taking back and listening. And this is astral. In the astral, you have to, yeah, you approach inspiration and you have to take your activity back and just listen.
So
So,
one of the central characters in three is Fichte. How
yeah,
does he so like play into what you're describing there?
yeah. I mean, Steiner makes this critique of Fichte that he says Fichte was productive. He discovered the I as a productive center, but the I is completely isolated from anything else. Everything else is non-I. When the people threw stones through Fichte's window because of this, because he claimed the I is related to God or is God, yeah, or something.
Mm-hmm.
And then he was accused of atheism and so on, and people threw stones through his window in Jena.
Uh-huh.
And Goethe said, well, now the non-I flew through his window.
Oh, wonderful.
And Steiner solves this problem, which Fichte couldn't solve, by just going from the I, from the I am to the thinking. Because in thinking, the content determines what you do. And Fichte couldn't find the content for the I. But when you go from the I am to the I'm thinking, and I'm thinking something, and the something determines itself, you just have to listen to the connections between the thoughts. Then you completely open up this isolated sphere of the I, and the spirit comes in, because then you have to produce it, but it tells you what you have to do. And that's how Steiner solves this in this Ausblick, or in this additional chapter, how he solves this problem of which Fichte had.
And what you're touching on there is like central to the second half of G.A. Paul.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, yeah, in a way, yes.
Oh, go on. So you're, how is it and how is it not for you?
Yeah, I mean, GA4 is in philosophy of freedom. Is really special because we now are dealing in the second part. We're dealing with action, not with cognition or epistemological questions, but with freedom and action. And all the books before were mostly about cognition, knowledge. Knowledge, that's the word, and not action. And in my understanding, everything we said is discussed in the first part of the philosophy of freedom, in a very new and very sometimes confusing way, because Steiner yeah, and at the same time it's very logical in itself. And then in the second part, he moves a step up. Because now we apply this intuitive thinking. When we transfer this into action, then we are free. And he describes that. And then there's a third part in the philosophy of freedom, short third part, which not many people are so aware of, that it has three parts, not two. And the third part is the in a what's the title of the third part? The
monism, something.
No. First is Wissenschaft, Science of Wissenschaft der Freiheit, Wirklichkeit der Freiheit, und the third one I forgot.
Consequences of monism. You've got knowledge of freedom.
No. Yeah, but no. The third, the title of the whole third part is the last questions.
Ultimate questions. That's right. Yeah.
The ultimate questions. And in this part, Steiner describes how it is if you das mit dem Gedankeninhalt erfüllte Leben ist zugleich das Leben in Gott. The life which is filled with the content of the ideas, life that's filled with, or that's penetrated or filled with the content of the ideas, is at the same time the life in God. And this is another higher level, yeah, because then you're completely within the physical and in the spiritual at the same time. And now we talked about these 4 steps of the human being, the 4 members, but there are 3 more. Because if the I works on the astral body in terms of this catharsis, yeah, that you mentioned in the beginning, then we develop the spiritual self, what Steiner calls the spiritual self. When the I works even deeper into the etheric body, then we develop the living spirit. Is that the English
life spirit?
Life spirit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Life spirit. Yeah.
The spiritual self, Geist self, the life spirit, and the 7th step, the highest one, is the spirit man, Geistig man. And now, when you have these ideas, then you can see the philosophy of freedom. In the first part, Science of Freedom describes the spiritual self. In the second part, when you start to realize this in your life, when you become and act free, then it describes the living spirit.
Mm-hmm.
And the third part, the ultimate questions, is the spirit man. And so this is also a title from a book from Frank Teichmann and others, that the philosophy of freedom is the anthropology of the higher self. It's not the anthropology of the self, as one might assume as a fourth step, but it's the anthropology of the higher self. And this may I continue on this?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, yeah.
Because this is very important now to also understand the book on Nietzsche, which follows on the philosophy of freedom. Because in theosophical lectures from 1905 and 1906, and I think also 1908, Steiner relates these three parts of the philosophy of freedom to the Trinity.
Mm-hmm.
He relates the first part to the Holy Spirit, or the spiritual self in human terms. The second part to the etheric Christ, the life spirit. There's a lecture where he really equals that. The life spirit is the etheric Christ in us. Yeah, when you out of freedom, you act, you do what is what is needed, and you do this with fire and knowledge and everything. This is love, yeah.
Yeah.
And so he relates the second part to the esoteric Christ, not etheric, esoteric Christ, and the third part to the Godfather. And this is very, very important, because in the second part of the philosophy of freedom, the central term is moral intuition. Yeah, in the first part, the important complementary idea is the cognitive intuition, and in the second part, it's the moral intuition. And moral intuition is related to the life spirit of the human being, and in a higher sense to the esoteric Christ. And this is Steiner's only critique in his next book on Nietzsche. I was always very surprised why did he write a book about Nietzsche? And Nietzsche talks about the free human being, the human being that has freed itself from all the weights and and boundaries and so on. The dancer, yeah, the happy dancer, der Übermensch, der Übermensch. Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is, of course, in a positive sense, could be understood as the spiritual self of the human being, which follows on the on the fourth step. The fifth step is the spiritual self. But Fichte, and this is Steiner's critique on Fichte, Fichte did not find the idea of moral intuition. He just said,
or Nietzsche.
Excuse me, Nietzsche.
Yeah.
Nietzsche just said, do what you want. And Steiner says, well, then you can also do what comes out of your desires and your body and so on. Yeah. But if you find moral intuition and then do what you want, yeah, because you see that's what I want, what is needed. And this is very, very interesting. I think that Steiner's critique on Nietzsche is Nietzsche did not find the relation to Christ. In every other aspect in this book, Steiner is enthusiastic about Nietzsche. Later, he was very critical about Nietzsche, but in this book, he is really enthusiastic. And the only critique is Nietzsche did not find moral intuition. Otherwise, it would be... Yeah.
intuitions.
So, in my view, it describes the spiritual self of the human being, but not yet there where it needs to go
It
to.
helps when you frame it like that. It helps certainly myself to understand why is there such a fascination in Nietzsche. It's because he's
Mm.
describing it's like the dilemma that's there for all of us if we're open and honest to ourselves about we are as
Mm.
human beings. He is that riddle, that enigma.
Yeah, and Steiner was enthusiastic about Nietzsche's texts and about his style and so on. And it's great when it's completely free of tradition and of all this. We do not do this here, and yeah. Okay, and then we come. Then it's sort of in a logical order. One would expect now we have to have a book on the life spirit.
Yeah.
And a life spirit means, in one way to express it, could be expressed in a way that you say, okay, now I live according to what I have realized. And in my understanding, it's not so clear, but to me, it's very clear that this book on Goethe's worldview, GA7, no, GA6,
GA6, yeah.
sorry, GA6, just describes how you live when you are in this mode of being connected to the world. How everything starts to live, how everything starts to metamorphose, the metamorphosis of world appearances. That's one chapter, and he also puts it in a whole historical perspective for the first time, starting with Plato. And also, of course, this takes a whole stream of the live stream of philosophy into incorporates it in this book.
When did he write this book? The GA6.
1897. It appeared in
1897.
1997.
Because I was thinking
When
about when
he
you said
finished it, he finished it. Sorry, he finished it when he left Weimar for Berlin.
it's reminding me of when he talks about the being of Anthroposophical, but that's like 1915 time. What does he
Sorry.
talk about? The being of Anthroposophical. In my mind, when the few times he actually talked about the being there, that's from 1915ish. You're not sure? Okay, not away. I'm as I'm listening to this, I'm realizing I haven't read that book yet. Then that's like something I have to
It's
come to
beautiful.
terms with, to work with.
Yes. And then we have the first uh, history of philosophy book of Steiner, the world and views of the world and of life, or life and world views in the 19th century,
Which then becomes
which in 1940 became the riddles of philosophy,
yeah.
expanded to the whole philosophy of history of philosophy. And first he started with it was a 2-volume book on the history of philosophy within the 19th century.
Yeah.
And it starts with Hegel, so very high up in the ideal realm, and it ends with Haeckel, very low down in the material realm. Yeah, and it moves through all this, and we have again the whole theme, the idea and the perception, or the spirit and matter, or the inner and the outer, now in a historical philosophical perspective. So, in my view, this incorporates in a way all this that has been discussed before in the 6 books that were written before, and puts it in a historical perspective. And you might call this spirit man. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to press his concept.
No, but it's hinting towards, because this is it's like an own experience of mine through so many engagement with anthroposophical thinking, a sense of connection, the whole of history.
Yes,
This living sense that's and it comes across like very clearly, and then when he expands to what then becomes the riddles of philosophy, he goes earlier than Plato. He goes all the way back to uh, Thales and
yes, yes,
and
yes,
then he goes after Hegel and Haeckel, and we actually get, it's actually right at the end there, he starts hinting at this being of anthroposophy, which is
yes,
something the beyond.
exactly. And it transcends the individual spiritual knowledge or action and puts it in a humanity perspective.
Yeah.
So from Hegel to Hegel, you may also say from idea to perception. And so it's, yeah, so this is.
Wonderful. Well, I know what I'm going to be reading for the next few years. um,
Maybe I should translate my book into English.
we, I'm sure there'll be many people that would be happy to read your thoughts. It's been really so enriching uh, you about this. Finding somebody who's passionate, wants to talk about this thread, and make clearer this idea of why the books on philosophy are so central. A lot of people with anthroposophy, they might choose other routes. Yeah,
Yeah, when you study these books and maybe just philosophy of freedom also, you build a very, very strong foundation for the future for understanding anthroposophy. And that's a really great thing about it. Yeah, because it becomes things become really very clear.
yeah.
And what you said before, you read it, you understand it, you read it 10 years later, you think, I didn't understand it when I read it 10 years before. Now I understand it. You read it 10 years later, you think, now I begin to understand it. 10 years later, you think, oh, now I got it.
That's progress. Exactly. Uh, Thank you so much for coming and talking to us. I'm be very interesting to see what reaction gets. It's
Yes,
so
please
nice to
let me
hear a
know.
German anthroposophist like talking to an English audience, because I myself sense a difference in quality. I don't want to like describe that quality, but I think it is important. Um, those like the more esoteric, we are aware that we're trying to create a etheric body and one another.
Hmm? Right.
So this is our first tentative attempt to move in that direction.
Yeah, thank you very much, Angus.
Thank you. It's been
Hmm?